אחד הדברים שאנחנו יכולים ללמוד מכך, לא כל כך הכרנו אנחנו שמענו על ג'נרל דיינמיקס הרבה שנים, על פידלי שמענו פחות, שחלק ניכר מהאינפורמציה על מה שקורה גם במגזר הפיננסי מצויה בחומר גלוי שלהם, וצריך לשבת ולקרוא אותו. ואני רוצה רק לספר לכם שגם נמצאים איתנו בקהל, התווספו אלינו אלוף במילואים עמי שפרן, ראש אגף התקשוב לשעבר, שיש לי את הכבוד לעדכן אתכם שהוא מוביל כרגע את הוועדה הציבורית מטעם מטה הסייבר הלאומי במינוי של ראש המטה, לשני דברים שאנחנו בודקים ברמה הציבורית והתקנו אותם בכל הקורא. אחד, הנושא הוא הסמכת המקצוע, איזה מקצועות יש בתחום האבטחה. הדבר השני, הסמכת המקצוע, איך מסמיכים אנשי אבטחה, איך יודעים שלא כל אחד רשאי לומר אני איש אבטחה לתחום מסוים, ועל זה תשמעו בקרוב. ונמצא איתנו גם אמיר רפפורט שמוביל את העיתון ישראל דיפנס, שאני ממש חושב שזו הזדמנות נהדרת. אמיר, זה פורום מיוחד, זה פורום שלא מתכנס כל פעם, לעשות על הנושא הזה הפיננסי, לתת לו דגש נכבד, ואני אשמח לעשות את זה. והמרצה הבא שלנו, יש לנו אנשים לא רק מארצות הברית, הוא דיוויד שין. דיוויד שין הוא איש מאוד מעניין ומיוחד, הוא מייצג פה את מקינזי. He is a director in McKinsey London office. He leads McKinsey cybersecurity practice in Europe and its global government defense practices. הוא ייתן לנו הרצאה מאוד מעניינת שאני מיד אגיד את השם שלה. He is currently leading a major research project on national cybersecurity strategies and McKinsey collaboration with the World Economic Forum on risk and resilience in a hyper-connected world. נושא מרתק. Much of his work focuses on the intersection of government and private sectors with a special focus on defense. He has led major transformations of the efficiency of armed forces on 3 continents and recently published Cut, Fat, Not Muscles. הוא גם עוזר לנו בעניינים האלה. Preserving combat power when budgets are falling in McKinsey government. He's doing a great job and he's coming very often. Prior to McKinsey, David was a part of leadership team of Credit Suisse European online banking business. He's married with 3 children and living in London, and he is going to present us the financial sector cyber risks, lessons from McKinsey's cyber risk maturity survey. I'm sure that this is something you need. David, please.
Good afternoon and thank you. I'm going to spare both the English speakers and the Hebrew speakers by speaking in English. Thank you, Rami, for the kind introduction. And if you want compliments, just work with Rami and you get them every day. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Those of you who don't know McKinsey, McKinsey is a leading global management consultancy firm. And many people say, what's between McKinsey and cybersecurity? Since McKinsey we're not a technology firm. We don't sell technology, we don't deliver technology, we do advise on technology. We advise on strategy, operations, and organization. And the reason that I'm here talking about cyber is that our clients, our global advisory panel of chief executives of some of the world's largest companies, came to us 2 years ago and said, we're worried, our IT people keep telling us that we need to spend more, our risk people keep telling us we're exposed, we don't know what to do, we don't know how much to spend, and we're pretty much convinced that our organizations are not ready for this kind of threat. That seems like a problem that you guys should be worrying about and helping us with. So we're a pretty analytical bunch of people, and we started to try and get some facts, some data about cyber risk. And what you see, and most of you have been to many conferences on this topic, is that there are lots and lots of great anecdotes. There are no numbers. I think, literally, probably no numbers. And, those who are at the heart of information sharing, despite the great press that it gets, also know that not all information is shared. So it's not surprising there are no numbers. This is stuff which is embarrassing for publicly traded companies, price sensitive. This is a problem. So we started to think, how can we put some facts around cybersecurity? And what we realized is it's going to be hard to put facts around the threats, but actually what really matters is what corporations are doing about it. So we think about how to help corporations improve their ability to deal with cyber threats. So we decided that we were going to measure cyber readiness. And we created a proprietary tool. We've now put 60 large institutions through that asks the question, how mature are you to deal with cyber risk? And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the findings on that. Of the 60 institutions that have been through this assessment, 40 of them are in the financial sector, so I think the findings are pretty relevant to today's discussion. So I'm going to make 3 points today. The first, which I think is going to be familiar from all of the previous sessions, is this is a serious issue. Yeah.
Did you also look at the utility sector and other?
Yeah, we have a bunch of sectors, and I'm going to focus mostly on financial services for today. It's a serious issue. The threat is real, and it's not getting better. As I said, that's not news. Second is the financial sector is not ready. Banks are slightly better than other sectors that we've looked at, but not that much. And finally, this is an organization and a governance problem before it's a technology problem, and that organizations need to think about a new paradigm for how they address cyber risk, and that new paradigm is emerging. So first of all, it's a serious issue. We've heard the anecdotes. Maybe after the previous speakers, I don't need to say much. I think, though, the 3 points on the right, the financial sector is under attack. Jim said, no network is impenetrable. So no matter how well you prepare, breaches cannot be prevented. And actually, when we look at the experiences of our clients, and when you read the stories and hear the anecdotes, how you respond often determines the scale of the damage much more than the depth of the attack. And one little story, an insurance company that we worked with had their underwriting system penetrated, probably to steal the algorithms. And the CISO said, well, we have to shut that system down while we remedy the breach. The head of commercial underwriting said, well, that's a $50 million a week decision. Those are hard decisions to make in real time when you're unprepared, and often made by people who don't really understand the business logic or the business costs of the security-related decisions that they're making. So how you respond probably has more impact on the damage than the attack itself. And it's getting worse. Some of those ATM attacks we heard about on banks were actually attacks on third-party card processing companies. Most business systems today involve many, many third parties. So you're dependent not only on your own security, on your own perimeter, on your own staff, but on tens, perhaps hundreds of third-party suppliers who, maybe in the supply chain of your third-party providers, you don't even know them. How do you create assurance? How do you create transparency of the risk on that? And if we look at the attack surface, so this is an illustration along the top of the financial services value chain. This is a map we did with an insurance company. And down the left of the specific cybersecurity risks. And you can see that both protecting customer data, disruption of the business, loss of intellectual property, the entire business system is at risk. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about how ready people are to deal with those risks. So what is McKinsey's Cyber Risk Maturity Survey? So we ask a bunch of questions in 8 categories. First of all, first of all, asking a set of questions about whether people understand their risks and their risk appetite. So do they know who might attack them? Do they understand the criticality of protecting different business assets? Do they know where they're vulnerable? And do they understand their risk appetite? Different businesses in different sectors and for different assets should have different risk appetites, which should drive investment decisions. And then there's a set of questions around how do they defend themselves? Do they know what technologies and systems are available? Do they know how to value and trade off potential defense systems and know how they should be implemented? And then the critical question of governance, how is the cybersecurity organization governed? Now, just if you look at the top, you see questions that are about strategy and organization, and at the bottom you see questions that are about technology. As a general rule, we find that the questions along the bottom, people have higher scores and lower variability on their performance. So the industry has been, as we might expect, very effective at selling knowledge and then product and creating a kind of minimum sufficient protection. Businesses have been relatively bad at understanding how they need to think about cybersecurity as a whole. So now if we ask how are different sectors on this survey, so what you see on this chart is you see the 8 areas that I just talked about, and we took the average of sectors and we asked how does each of these sectors compare on each of those practices to the average. So if you look at the banking sector, you think, well, there's room for optimism here. They're all green. But let's just look at the numbers. The score is out of 4, where 4 is best practice and 1 is frankly doing nothing at all. The banking industry as a whole is 2.5 and is on every one of those practices not very far ahead of the others, but is notably stronger on knowing their attackers and knowing their vulnerabilities. If we move to the other part of the financial sector, insurance, what we see is a sector which is lagging well behind other sectors, or somewhat behind other sectors. Healthcare about average, and then the mix of other sectors. So what we see is a picture where sectors are not that different, and if we ask what is actually going on within the sectors, what this chart shows, those little bars, is the variance within the sectors. And what you see is that companies within each sector are so variant that we can be pretty sure that a large number of banks are less good than even maybe some of the worst or the average of the other sectors. Banking is an industry which we learned in 2008 has systemic risk in it. If you take a large bank out, you affect the whole system because of the interconnectivity of the system. So this is something that should worry us. The banking industry is heavily interconnected, and a large number of banks are not mature and ready to address cyber risk. So the next question you might ask, is that because they're just not spending enough? Is money the primary determinant of cyber risk maturity readiness? So we asked that question, and what you see on this chart on the vertical axis is cybersecurity maturity. So that's our survey results. And on the horizontal axis, how much companies spend on IT security as a percentage of their IT budget. And what you see is, first of all, there's no correlation between the two. There are some, at the top left, organizations who are achieving a relatively, compared to their peers, high degree of cyber maturity at a relatively low cost. That may not be attractive for the technology industry, but that's certainly our mission to help our clients get to there. There are some who are spending a lot and achieving a relatively higher degree of maturity. They're either well protected or very worried, potentially for good reasons. And then there's a notable group, the unprotected, and some who are spending rather a lot and not perhaps getting as much as they should for their money. So we should be worried. We have a critical industry, a critical infrastructure that is relatively unprepared and certainly not as much more prepared as we would expect from other sectors. What I'd like to talk about now is what is the emerging cybersecurity paradigm at an organizational level, not just at a technological level. One of the first and what we see critical gap is about prioritizing information assets and related risks. So what does this mean? So let me give an example. We worked for a large global natural resources company. So they take resources out of the ground. And we asked them what were the information assets that were most valuable to them. And they said, well, it's our production data. That's price-sensitive information. People want to get that so they can trade on it. So we did a little exercise, and we managed to reconstruct about 90% accurate production data from entirely public sources. This was not the crown jewels. We spent some more time, and what we understood what really mattered was the detailed negotiation information. This is a company that negotiates as a matter of course with nation states. Some of those nation states are well known for their cyber capabilities, and they were sending each other emails with their negotiating positions. When you start to look at who really needs access to this information, it's a company with more than 50,000 employees. There's 400 people who need to have access to this type of information. So, suddenly the cyber security problem for the institution's most critical information asset collapses from, something that is globally distributed in hundreds of plants and mines and around the world to, a few numbers that are transmitted between 400 people. Another example from the same institution was, we said, well, what about disruptive cyber attacks? Well, they said, people are going to hack into the control systems of our plants. And, that could be catastrophic. And so they said, well, we have to air gap all the control systems. They have to be on an isolated network which is not connected to the internet in any way. That's quite an expensive effort when you're in 40 or 50 countries. When you started to ask them about different plants and what the risk was, actually it turns out for a lot of the industrial processes that they run, the worst thing that happens is that the plant stops. So the value at risk is the number of days of plant downtime until you can start it up again. It happens that they have 10% roughly of their plants. Actually, the risk is that the plant explodes, typically killing, thousands of local people, a Bhopal type scenario. But suddenly, again, the problem collapses to 10% of the plants that need to have a very different network. That was $150 million a year saving from that discovery. So prioritizing information assets and related risks, and then protecting the different assets in a differentiated way. This is not something that most IT architectures support in a particularly easy way. The third one is integration of security into the technology environment to drive scalability. I mean, first of all, we all know how hard it is to get reliable code, let alone secure code. This is a big, big deal, and it's a big change. It's not, it's moving from the bolt-on perimeter encryption. It's moving from monitoring to the way we design networks, the way we write code, what it means to have system administrators, moving from a world where system administrators have broad open access, can read what's in the systems. One example of a bank, one system administrator had their laptop stolen and the entire bank was compromised with backdoors installed within 24 hours, and the story, as you can imagine, goes on from there. Deployment of active defenses. So this is the world of intelligence, of honeypots, and what we now see, even though not talked about very openly, is corporations that are beginning to actually hack back. So probably not legal. In some jurisdictions, certainly not legal. But corporations are beginning to think like medieval trading companies, that if you can't be in business, if you can't have your own, if you don't have at some level your own private army. The nation state is letting down business. Our clients tell us in multiple countries of calling up the law enforcement authorities to tell them about an attack that's underway and getting the response, that's very interesting. We'll send someone round to try and catch them, not to prevent the attack, but to lock up the attackers. We have a fundamental change in the relationship between the corporation and the nation state in terms of protecting assets. Number 5, enlisting frontline personnel. This is the bread and butter of change management. So I'm sure many people in this room have been involved in large IT programs where they've spent, maybe a third to a half of the budget on training the front line, on creating new mindsets and ways of working. I don't know how many people in this room have been involved in a security program where a third to a half of the budget has been spent on changing the mindsets of senior management all the way down to the front line so that they behave differently. Anybody in here been in one of those situations? So, this is about, we saw how many of the attacks have come from spear phishing or insiders. Spear phishing is a preventable injury, but it's a behaviorally preventable injury, not a technologically preventable injury. Continuing testing and enhancement. One of the things that we've been doing with our clients is wargaming. So anybody who's been in government or the military would be quite used to the fact that you prepare for fast-moving, difficult, complex disaster situations by practicing, by trying out the organization's ability to respond and to decide, to command and control in real time. In business, that's actually quite a rare thing for people to do. And we discover when we do these cyber war games that large institutions discover that they're deeply uninterconnected. They've been operating in silos. The people who have to make business decisions have probably never met the security people. They speak a different language. And that many of those key issues, like I talked about at the beginning, of the value of switching off a system, completely unknown to anybody. And finally, using existing business processes. So many of our clients who talk about cyber risk are now beginning to talk about IT risk. Because what they've realized is, while cyber might be different and might require some different technologies, some different ways of thinking, some different behaviors, the business needs to be governed as a whole, and that actually discovering, as the Royal Bank of Scotland did, that a small error in a normal IT procedure takes the bank out for several days needs to be managed in the same way as you manage other IT-related risks, that creating new governance processes one on top of the other actually creates more silos, not fewer, and that cybersecurity needs to be governed in a whole institution way using the processes and procedures that are already in place rather than creating new ones. Just to sum up, it's a serious issue. The threat is real and getting worse. Businesses are not prepared, and financial institutions are also not prepared. And there is an emerging new paradigm that thinks about protecting the institution as an organization, linking together all the different components from technology to the way the front line behaves and the way the institution is governed, that the most forward-thinking institutions are beginning to put into place. Thank you.